Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode we are going to be doing another faction focus, this time taking a look at the Necrons, going over all of the information that has been previewed by Games Workshop. We will be getting into the nitty gritty detail, going through the army rules, detachment rules, data sheets and everything else that we know so far. Like we did with the other faction focuses, we're going to be giving each section a score out of 10 so we can stack up each faction against each other and see who are the winners and who are the losers. And so, without further ado, my will be done. The Dinas is eternal, and let us march right into today's video. The first thing we are going to review is the Necrons army rule, Reanimation Protocols, a good old classic rule that has been part of the faction since they first came into being all those years ago back in 3rd edition. If you're a longbeard like me, you'll remember when it was a Terminator ripoff and it was called We'll Be Back. But regardless of its name, it's always done pretty much the same thing. Allowed your Necrons to get back up and reanimate after they have taken casualties. This represents the living metal that Necrons are made of, with limbs flowing back together and reattaching to bodies, heads being screwed back on, and generally battle damage just healing back to nothing, not even a blemish remaining on the gleaming armor of the Necron warriors. In 9th edition, this rule was so complicated it needed a full A4 page and some kind of reading degree to understand how it actually worked, and most people just learnt it by playing it because reading it made almost no sense. Now in 10th edition, things have been vastly simplified, and overall, simply because of that, the rule feels so much better. If your army faction is Necrons, at the end of your command phase, each unit from your army with this ability activates its reanimation protocols and reanimates D3 wounds. Each time such a unit reanimates a wound, if that unit contains one or more models with fewer than their starting number of wounds remaining, select one of those models. That model regains one lost wound. If all models in that unit have their starting number of wounds, but that unit is not at its starting strength, one destroyed model is returned to that unit with one wound remaining. Once such a unit is at its starting strength and all of its models have their starting number of wounds, nothing further happens. If this still seems pretty complicated and you're not quite getting it, or perhaps you're new to 40k, let me break it down and give you a few examples. In the simplest possible terms, each unit in your army heals D3 wounds. That's it. And the only thing you have to do is work out if you're going to bring back a bunch of one wound models or if you need to start worrying about multi-wound models. Let's begin with the Necron warriors. Let's say you've got a squad of 10 of them in your army. Each man in that squad has one wound. Let's say you have taken 5 casualties. At the beginning of your turn, you roll your D3 and you get a 2. That means you can bring 2 wounds back into that unit, which means that you bring 2 1 wound models back to life. That's it. For Necron warriors, it's really simple. Anything that's 1 wound, it's really simple. You just work out how many casualties are missing from the squad, and you roll the dice, and that's how many you get back. To be clear, you can't start using this rule to get more models back than you started with. You're only restoring casualties. So if you have a unit of 10 Necron warriors and it's taken no damage, you can't roll reanimation protocols and add D3 fresh new models back into the unit and start going up to 13 or 16 warriors. You can't do that. Whatever your starting strength was at the beginning of the battle is your limit. But let's take a look at what happens with multi-wound models such as Necron destroyers. Let's say you've got a squad of 3. One of them has died, one of them has taken a wound, and one of them is on full wounds remaining. It's got all 3. Now, if you roll a 1 for your reanimation protocol and you only heal 1 wound back into the unit, then the injured destroyer regains 1 lost wound, and so the end result would be you would have 2 full health destroyers, but one of them would still be dead. if you rolled a 2, the first wound would go back to healing that second destroyer. Again, he would go back to full health. But then you've got 1 left in your pool. Because the squad has taken a casualty with that spare wound, you're now allowed to reanimate that dead destroyer. He comes back 1 wound. If you are lucky and you're able to heal all 3 wounds, then what happens is, as before, the first one goes to healing the injured guy. Second one goes to bringing the casualty back, and the third one goes back to that third Necron that's just come back to life and gives him an extra wound, meaning the final result would be 2 full health destroyers and 1 sitting on 2 wounds. So now that we know how it works, is reanimation protocols any good? Well, yes, but also no. It's very powerful, and at the same time, it's got a massive Achilles heel. On the one hand, being able to heal D3 wounds a turn, army-wide, is massive. Anything that you don't destroy is going to quickly start regrowing and healing itself. And what's insane about this is it's every turn. If you have a unit of warriors that takes a bit of a battering, maybe loses half of its casualties, you can just stick them out of line of sight, hide them behind some cover for a turn or 2, let them regain some wounds, and then turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, they can re-emerge as a fresh threat. If you don't destroy a Necron unit, never counter out of the game. However, that's the problem. If you do destroy a unit, it can't reanimate. You can't bring back members of a squad that's been completely and utterly wiped out. Therefore, savvy players will take every opportunity to concentrate fire. Intensify forward firepower, want nothing getting through, and they'll make sure that each Necron unit is destroyed before moving on to the next. But here's the thing. Even if reanimation protocols isn't bringing people back, it's still doing its job. It makes your opponent's firepower noticeably less efficient, because he can't afford to split fire. He can't afford to leave a single model left in the squad, because if he does, it could start regenerating and healing, and especially in the case of those heavy hitting units like destroyers, if he's able to bring a full destroyer back, it doesn't matter if it's got 1 wound left or if it's got 4 wounds left, it's still going to have maximum damage output. So every unit has to be obliterated, often leading to overkill, which by itself means shots are going to be wasted. Overall, I'm going to give reanimation protocols a 7 out of 10. I think it is a powerful ability, one that even when your opponent is doing his best to nullify it, is still having an influence upon the game. Next up, we have command protocols, the detachment rule that you get for taking an awakened dynasty. This rule has also been massively simplified from its previous 9th edition incarnation. While a Necron's character model is leading this unit, each time a model in this unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll. To be clear, that is going to affect both the melee and ranged attacks of your units. On the surface, this seems very good. Being able to essentially stack army-wide +1 to hit, depending on how many characters you're shoving into your list and units, is very powerful. However, there are 3 small problems. First up, we don't know which leaders will be able to join which units yet. It may be that adding +1 to hit to your destroyers would be lovely, but if the destroyer lord can't actually go in that squad, it's going to start causing some problems. Secondly, if the Necron warrior datasheet is anything to go by, and we'll be getting into that later on in this video, it seems like Necron ballistic skill and weapon skill may have taken a bit of a hit army-wide to essentially compensate for this rule. For example, warriors used to be ballistic skill 3+, now they're ballistic skill 4+, because GW assumes that you're going to be sticking a character in there, and therefore they're going to be back on a 3+. Essentially, rather than command protocols actually giving you a buff, all they're doing is allowing you to get back to where you were, but now you're having to spend extra points on characters to do so. Lastly, there is a potential problem of creating a two-tiered system, where those units which can be joined by leaders and can benefit from command protocols do very well, but those units which can't end up getting consigned to the dumpster and being left on the shelf. On top of all this, there's always the risk that you run into an army with a lot of precision. I mean, the Tyranids alone have got hyper adaptations, which allows them to give their entire army the ability to pick out characters from units. If that starts happening, you could find your force quickly falling apart and struggling to land any hits and do any damage because they're essentially walking around without any command protocols. To be honest though, most of those are pretty small problems. A little bit of rust on an otherwise gleaming carapace of an immortal. And it is hard to complain about easy access to +1 to hit. So overall, I am going to give command protocols a 6.5 out of 10. But now let's move on to some data sheets, beginning with everyone's favorite space pyramid, the monolith. As you would expect for what is essentially the super heavy of the Necron dynasties, it's got a chunky profile. Movement of 7 is pretty slow, but considering it can deep strike, it's not going to be a problem. Toughness 14 makes it highly durable, especially when you combine it with its 2+ save and 20 wounds. Don't forget that if you don't destroy the monolith in one go, thanks to reanimation protocols, it's going to heal D3 wounds back a turn as well. Strangely, the monolith has a poor leadership. Necrons typically are really good at morale, essentially being soulless automatons, but that does not seem to be the case with their 10th edition brothers. Leadership 7+ means that there's a decent chance if your monolith takes a lot of damage, it's going to suffer from battle shock. And considering it's got an objective control of 8, you may find at the worst possible moment that an objective gets taken off you and flipped to the opponent just because your monolith decided to have a bad day. Fortunately, even if the monolith does have a temper tantrum, it's bringing enough firepower to make the opponent still hurt. It comes with 4 Gauze Flux arcs, which each have lethal hits, rapid fire 3, a 24-inch range, 3 attacks each, ballistic skill 3+, strength 6, AP -1, 1 damage. That's a hell of a lot of DACA and allows the monolith to clear hordes with ease. On top of that, it's also coming with a particle whip. This is another 24-inch range weapon with 3d6 shots, ballistic skill 3+, strength 8, AP -1 and 2 damage. This one has blast and devastating wounds. This makes it pretty effective against all targets. If you're shooting at a horde, the more models in that squad, the more reliable the particle whip becomes. 3d6 +1, 3 +2, suddenly that floor isn't looking so low. You then also have the fact that with devastating wounds, any 6s that you get to wound are going to start stacking mortals onto the enemy, and considering it's damage 2, that could be a lot of mortals indeed. I personally would swap out the Flux Arcs for the Death Rays. Yes, you're getting a lot less shots, but it allows the monolith to engage any target reliably. Each Death Ray has 1 shot at ballistic skill 3+, but it is strength 12, AP -4, D6 +1 damage. It's a souped up las cannon. And they also have sustained hits of D3. Considering you're coming with 4 of these things on one monolith, there's a decent chance one of those is going to be a 6, and suddenly you're going to start generating lots of extra attacks. But the main thing about the Death Rays is they're proper anti-tank. There's enough strength, AP and damage there to tear a chunk out of anything from a Rhino through to a Screamer Killer or anything bigger as well. And the Particle Whip is enough anti-infantry thanks to the fact it has blast and already a pretty high volume of shots. Look, at the end of the day, 10th edition is very clearly about having the right tool for the right job. You cannot expect to grind down enemy armor with the Gauze Flux Arcs, and the Particle Whip just isn't quite punchy enough to count as an anti-tank weapon. But if you have the Death Rays in there, you can cover all your bases, and any unit which can make square pegs fit through round holes and can cover multiple bases is extremely valuable in 10th. The only downside to these weapon systems is they're all surprisingly short-ranged, capping out at 24 inches. This means you're going to need to get up close and personal to really start hammering the enemy. Fortunately, that's not actually a risk. because the Monolith is bringing a very powerful melee weapon to the fight as well, the Portal of Exile. It's 6 attacks that hit on a 2+ at strength 8, AP-2 and 3 damage. This thing has no problem with hoovering up Terminators in combat. It's also got a pretty cool ability known as the Eternity Gate. Essentially, this allows you to deep strike a friendly infantry unit from your reserves to within 6 inches of the Monolith, whether it has the deep strike ability or not. Also, if you've got a unit that's already on the board, you can teleport it to the Monolith, again, staying within 6 inches. But the most potent thing about the Eternity Gate is, unlike other deep strikers, you don't need to stay 9 inches away from enemy models. As long as you're out of engagement range, you're having a great time. So you could potentially have your Monolith deep strike in, then teleport 20 infantry to it, and they can go 6 inches out from Monolith, which could allow you to steal an objective from the enemy, start movement blocking things, or causing all sorts of other shenanigans. But what kind of infantry would you want to bring through the Monolith's Eternity Gate? Well, one contender that GW has shown off is the humble Necron warrior. Warriors are the backbone of any dynasty. They make up the vast majority of its rank and file troops. They have a middling stat line. It's not quite as bad as a Termagant, but it's not going to stand up to a Space Marine. Necron Warriors have a movement of 5 inches, they're toughness 4, they've got a save of 4+, 1 wound, leadership 7, again, surprisingly high. I suspect that Necron characters are going to have really good leadership to help boost their units. But of course, like most battle line units, they've got objective control of 2. Each warrior comes equipped with either a Gore's Flare or a Gore's Reaper as its ranged weapon. The Gore's Flare has a 24-inch range, attacks 1, strength 4, AP dash, damage 1. It's rapid fire 1, which means when you get within 12 inches, you are going to get an extra shot. And it also has lethal hits. This is pretty massive. Gore's weapons have always been good at stripping through armor, and lethal hits basically gives you 6s to hit auto wound. Now, any seasoned 40k player out there, especially those that played the latter part of 9th edition, will tell you how valuable easy access to auto wounding is. Imperial Guard with their Born Soldiers, Votann with their Grudge Tokens. Both of these armies were massively boosted by their ability to stack easy wounds onto any kind of target. And this ability only gets scarier when you start looking at the Gore's Reaper. Sure, it's only got a 12-inch range, but it comes with strength 5 and, more importantly, AP-1. This means that a full squad of Necron Warriors with Gore's Reapers will be putting out 40 shots. There's a lot of potential for lethal hits there, and even if you don't get the lethal hits through, thanks to the additional pip of strength, you're going to be wounding most light vehicles on 5s, unlike the Gore's Flare, which is going to have to fish for 6s. Whatever happens, the AP-1 is going to start taking a toll on your opponent's armor saves. A lot of vehicles in the game have got a 3+ save. Taking that down to a 4+ with your basic weapon is going to really start chewing through their armor. Like with the Monolith, anything that allows you to start cross-pollinating anti-tank and anti-infantry weapons into one profile is extremely valuable in 10th. Having the right tool for the right job is so important, and any time that you can force that square peg through that round hole, you've heard me say it before, is an opportunity you need to be taking advantage of. Unfortunately, there is a big problem. You see, their ballistic skill and weapon skill have been reduced to a 4+, and I can't help but think that is to accommodate command protocols. Essentially, if you want a Necron warrior unit to do anything, it's going to need to have a leader in there, because otherwise its morale is going to be a problem and its ballistic skill is going to be a big problem. That means Necron warriors are going to need to be a bit cheaper than they are now to take into account what is essentially a hidden points cost by needing to take a leader with them. But before we start dismissing the Necron warrior, they do have one extremely important ability. Their number is Legion. Necron warriors have always been famous for being particularly easy to reanimate, and this rule represents that. Instead of bringing D3 warriors back a command phase, you actually get to bring back D6. Unless you're in range of an objective marker, and then it's D3 plus 3. On average, this means a unit of warriors holding an objective is going to bring back 5 dudes a turn. Your opponent will need to overkill them because very quickly warriors are going to start coming back. Now obviously this has the potential to bring back a lot of warriors over the course of a game, and even if a single one survives, their numbers are going to regrow very quickly on those mid-board objectives. Another thing that I like about it though is it helps you protect your backfield from indirect fire. A single squad of Necron warriors sat on an objective is going to be very difficult for your opponent to sweep away with a casual bit of mortar fire if they're regrowing 5 or 6 a turn. Zooming out for a moment, what I love about these two data sheets together is we can already see the synergies forming with the Necrons. Dropping down Monolith, having 20 warriors with Gor's Reapers come through the Eternity Gate, having them led by a Lord so they can unleash a devastating volley of Gor's Reaper fire, and then at the same time taking an objective and being really difficult to shift off it. All of that just feels right and sounds brilliant. However, more so than any faction we've looked at so far, the points are going to make or break the Necrons. If those warriors are not appropriately costed, taking into account their reduced ballistic skill, or the Necron Lords are overcosted because GW has overcompensated for command protocols, things are going to fall apart very quickly. As a result, because there's so much information we don't know, even though I'm liking what I'm seeing with the Necrons, I need to be conservative with the score that I'm going to give them for their data sheets. And so in total, I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. But now let's move on from the data sheets and start looking at everything else. The weapon profiles and stratagems that have been previewed. And we'll begin with the Doomsday Cannon. It's blast and heavy. It's got a 72-inch range, which is very, very long range indeed. D6 plus 1 attacks, ballistic skill 3+, strength 15, AP -4, damage 4, and it comes with the overwhelming obliteration rule. In your movement phase, if this model remains stationary until the end of the turn, its Doomsday Cannon has the devastating wounds ability. Frankly, this weapon is very good. It has the range that allows it to stay back and shoot at targets of opportunity. Thanks to Blast, not only is it good against vehicles, but it also has plenty of opportunities against hordes as well. Ballistic skill 3+ means that it's gonna hit, and if it stays still, it's really gonna hit. Strength 15 means that any target in the game is getting wounded on 3s at the very worst, because Games Workshop has confirmed that the toughness ceiling for 10th edition is going to be 14. Overwhelming obliteration is a nice to have, but fortunately the Doomsday Cannon is powerful enough without it. The problem with overwhelming obliteration is it requires you to stay still, and traditionally games of 40k are won and lost in the movement phase, and those abilities that require you to stay still aren't always that helpful. In a similar vein, GW has shown off another very powerful weapon, the Spear of the Void Dragon. Now this has 2 different melee profiles, Sweep and Strike. Sweep is cool, it gives you 10 attacks at weapon skill 3+, strength 8, AP -1, 2 damage, great for clearing through a squad of Space Marine intercessors, but the real party is with Strike. You do get less attacks, but my god, each one of those attacks has enough power to pierce the sun. 5 attacks at weapon skill 2+, strength 12, AP -3, D6 plus 2 damage, and the cherry on top, if this weapon wasn't already powerful enough, is that it's anti-vehicle 2+. That means any vehicle on the game, regardless of its toughness, will be wounded on a 2+. I don't even think this weapon needs it. Strength 12 already means you can be wounding most vehicles on 3s. But what that means is The Spear of the Void Dragon Strike will absolutely dominate vehicles, but feel free to send this into anything that's tough, any monster, because it's going to be able to tear a chunk out of that as well. The last thing to have a gander at is the Protocol of the Hungry Void, the Awakened Dynasty Battle Tactic Stratagem. Now this costs 1 command point and you use it in the fight phase. You use it on 1 Necron unit, it can be any unit from your army that has not been selected to fight yet. The effect is you add 1 to the strength, and in addition, if there's a leader in the squad, you also get +1 to your AP. Considering that it looks like most Necron units are really going to need characters to get the most juice out of the squeeze, you can basically see this as +1 strength and +1 AP all the time. It's a nice little stratagem. Anything that directly boosts your damage output is always welcome, and it has a couple of ways of being used. Firstly, you can use it as an insurance policy, making sure that a fight goes your way. We all know how those dice can be sometimes. And also, you can use it to perhaps catch an unwary opponent off guard, doing more damage than he expected. The problem is that we haven't seen any Necron combat units yet. You could put this on some warriors, but all that's going to do is let them beat the crap out of some guardsmen or some termagants, which, let's be honest, you shouldn't really have a problem with dealing with those units anyway. Where this is going to shine is on your Lich Guard or on your Scorpec Destroyers, but we just don't know what they do yet. So it makes it kind of tricky to know how powerful this is going to be. Having said all that, considering how powerful and good the weapon previews were, I think even with a bit of uncertainty around this, I'm comfortable giving the Necrons a very solid 8 out of 10 for the everything else category. Bringing this all together, the Necrons score a pretty good 28.5 out of 40. I think what's really holding them back is I didn't see much that made me go, wow, that is bonkers. That's absolutely out of this world. That is 360 no scope good. But at the same time, I didn't see anything that made me really concerned for the faction at all. The main positive takeaway is it looks like they've been massively simplified, which is so good for new players getting into the game. And I think even a lot of long-serving Dynasts are going to have a sense of relief that they don't need to have an engineering degree to understand how their faction operates anymore. But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you want to go the extra mile and support the channel as well as unlocking a whole bunch of perks, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon. By becoming a supporter, you will gain access to the Mordy and Glory Discord server, an online community of over 1,500, that's right, 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got army lists and tactics sections, hobbying and painting, and we've even got a pretty spicy meme channel as well. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Blanco Lost Soul, Gripstar, Gordon Grenadier, Shackleton Magram, Scott Tennant, Dalesguard, Advocate, Karen Sharp, David Shearer, and Corper. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to shout out the latest Patreons as well, so a massive thank you to Jonathan Jacobson, Flynn Drake, Skeletor1695, and Demaker777. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive, massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Thank you guys. Your generous support makes a huge difference. And it's no exaggeration to say that without it, I wouldn't be able to do Mordy and Glory full time. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.